Today, I'm reporting on mysterious giant stone monuments. As you can see from all the posters, you know, I'm really addicted to getting pictures copied from books. Even yesterday I went down and got some more done in the middle. But I think I'm picture-oriented, and I hope you are too, because the pictures on the posters, I hope, will elaborate a little on what I say. The three places I'm going to report on come from across the world and across the centuries, yet they seem to have some similarities. If you look at the first one here, Stonehenge, that was 2,800 to 1100 BC. The next one, San Augustin in Colombia, South America, was a little later, 500 BC to 500 AD. Then Easter Island, the farthest one over there, was all AD, 700 AD to 1600 AD. Yet there seem to be similarities in them, and I thought it would be interesting to compare. Robbins and I have visited Stonehenge and San Augustine, though not Easter Island. I know Janet Hansen has been to Stonehenge because she lent me this wonderful book. And some of the pictures here were copied from this book. Pick it up afterwards. Thanks so much. Anyone else been to Stonehenge? Raise your hands. Quite a few. Yeah. And what about San Augustine? Anybody? That was up in the mountains of the Andes, and I'll never forget that trip where we went on a bus up the mountain, and there was no fence on each side, and they were just at that time making the road. And I would look down this way and down that way, and glad when we got to the top. Well, anyway, has anyone been to Easter Island? Anybody at all? Well, so that's new to all of us. All three places have mysterious aspects, some of which have been partly solved by archaeologists, anthropologists, astronomers, and other scientists, but some mysteries still remain. I'll start with the oldest, Stonehenge, which we visited in 1976. Here are these fuzzy-looking tourists. It was kind of raining that day. It's a huge circle of stones, as you can see here. On the Salisbury Plain, about 8 miles north of Salisbury, and visited by many tourists. So here are some pictures we'll be talking about. This is a summer solstice where you can see the sun through a particular part of it. And this is how an artist imagined it when it was finished. And at a summer solstice with people worshiping there. Here are some of the large stones. It's how it is now. Many of them are fallen. Uh, 20th century scientists who were skilled in radiocarbon dating began to clear up some of those mysteries, which were, when was it built? Who built it? How was it built? Where did the stones come from? What was it used for? In early times, there were many myths that were developed, most of which are not true. One was that Merlin brought the stones from Ireland. No. Another that Druids built it and worshiped there. Sounds like a good thought, but that wasn't true. Or perhaps, because it was such an architectural feat, it was built by the Romans. Not that either. It is now generally believed that Stonehenge was in use from about 2800 BC until after 1100 BC, and that it was built in 3 stages: Stonehenge 1, Stonehenge 2, and Stonehenge 3. I must tell you that all scientists are not in agreement about the dates, because different books I read said different dates. So if you have a different idea about it, you could be right too. Stonehenge was basically a large circle enclosed by a deep ditch. Outside on the edge is a ditch, 4 or 5 or 6 feet deep. And for 500 years, that's all they used. It was an outdoor temple the first 500 years. There were only 3 stones there, 2 on the side toward the rising sun, and a heel stone. And they must have just had worship services out in this field with a hole all around it. There were also, later, there were some what they called aubrey holes, because of the person who discovered them, that were dug in the ground, and they think that they used those for burying bones and other mementos of a person's life. The Stonehenge 2, they started to do something, but they didn't finish it. They put a lot of sarsen, is a kind of stone, around, and they were going to have 2 circles of them, and they only finished half of it. And later in Stonehenge 3, they took all those stones down and made something entirely new. They made this circle of uprights, which you can see here, circle of uprights. Oh, here, this is better. On the outside. And they were wonderful in how they figured out how to fasten these together. They made a little knob on the top of the upright, like there. You probably can't see that little knob. Yeah. But then there was a little hole that they put in the cross piece. And so it would fit right on and stay for hundreds of years. Whoops. They also, on the inside of it, had a horseshoe shape of what they called trilithons, which were higher, and but they had the same fastening on top. And all of it faced toward the summer rising sun, so that they could go there on the solstice and the sun would come through for their services. The builders of this final version were the Wessex people, who had the power and wealth and did much training. The earlier ones had been bronze and even earlier Stone Age people. So it was finished in various times over the years, finally completed in 1100 BC. So how was it built? First, there was the problem of transporting these huge stones. How do you get them from the quarry as much as 135 miles away? Huge, huge stones. Guesswork is that they were taken by raft for part of the way, and then they were pulled on sledges over rollers for the rest. But some of them came from closer. But imagine some were 50 tons, and you didn't have the transportation vehicles that we have nowadays. I want to show you a little bit from these pictures in the middle, which I found very interesting. It's from a Time Life book, and the artist studied what the scientists had been figuring out and made pictures. I think the people are a little romanticized, that they have neat cut beards and the women have nicely fastened up hair, but still it's very interesting to see how they have made it. This is the circle. Remember I told you about the circle with the ditch? Now how do you make a circle that's 160 feet in radius? Well, they made leather rope, which on one end had a peg that they put in the middle, and they just walked around it on the outside. Now, that seems perfectly simple to us, but if you'd never done it before, I mean, it was really a wonderful invention. And then they dug, here they are digging holes. If you come up afterwards, you'll see antlers. They were digging with antlers. Now that's a pretty smart idea. And other tools that they had invented to dig this deep ditch all around the outside. Now, if you were a Stone Age person or a Bronze Age, how would you split a rock in half to get it out of the quarry? I thought this was a very unique system. They took a lot of little twigs, put them in a row where they wanted to split the rock, poured oil on it, lighted a match, made a little fire on that strip. Then when the fire was over, they poured cold water on it, and the cold water on the heated rock made it begin to split. So then they dropped these heavy rocks, which they called mauls, into that hole that was beginning, and it gradually split it open, which was pretty clever. I never heard of anything like that. But then the next problem was, how do they get these huge rocks from where they'd split them off at the quarry to Stonehenge, more than 100 miles away? Well, one of the systems that they used was this sledge that pulled it. And they said they needed as many as 1,000 men to pull that sledge. Next, maybe this one didn't take as many people, but it sure took a lot of ingenuity to figure out how to make these uprights stand upright instead of being flat. They dug a hole square on 3 sides and sloping on the other side, so they could just slip it in to the sloping side and gradually lift it up with all these logs that they put under it. Lift a little bit, put it under. And they did a similar thing to put the lintels on top, to make that top piece with the little hole in it fit over the knob. So then it was finally done. I find these pictures very interesting. It brings a human touch to it. Well, of all the several hundred prehistoric circles in the British Isles, Stonehenge is outstanding for having the tallest rocks and the most precise shaping and joining of the lintels. What was Stonehenge used for? Almost everyone agrees that it was used for a temple and some burials, but since there are no written records, we probably will never know what kind of gods were worshipped or what kind of ceremonies took place. Some have suggested that it was a temple for sun worship, and I showed you how the artist envisaged that. When the sun rises, they were probably reassured that the world would go on as it had. The sunrise at the summer solstice can be seen as you look down the central axis through the middle trilithon and two entrance stones, and down the long avenue that's made all the way to the Avon River. Astronomers have also shown how exact the measurements are for other observations, such as indicating when an eclipse would be. It might even have been an observatory. Actually, since so much of Stonehenge is now ruined, this is difficult to prove. And there may be mysterious aspects of Stonehenge which may never be solved. Now I'm going to change posters here and get San Augustin. We went on a trip to San Augustin with our family in 1974. And during our family trip, we visited the San Augustin Archaeological Park, where there are over 300 large sculptures, which you can see here, as well as graves dating back to 500 BC to perhaps 500 AD, somewhat later than Stonehenge. Here in this picture, we each chose a statue to stand by. Here I am with a woman with a child, and here's our daughter Cedar and our daughter-in-law Linda with I think this was an eagle, and Robbins with some mysterious person, and David, our son, with another mysterious person.
Robin was always with that mysterious person in the center.
Let's see, was that?
Looks like the same one up
Well, this is holding a little figure, and I'm not sure.
there. No, I mean, Robin is on a...
Oh, excuse me.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes.
me. Yeah. Well,
Kind of.
could be. Could be. And I think you'll see other ones. There are just amazing numbers there. 300 of all different people, animals, such a variety. Some are tall like totem poles, like these here. That looks a little bit like Stonehenge. See all those? And this is a grave. Many of the animals have symbolic meaning. The eagle is a symbol of light and power. The serpent is the mythical ancestor. The frog is a symbol of a water cult. It is believed that the stones for these large sculptures were pulled on rollers for a long distance, then sculpted with flint tools. And I think you can see that the artists developed a unique style which involves geometric forms and symbolism, but also a lot of imagination. There is evidence that they may have been painted originally. There are so many different ones there. It's just amazing. And you will find that's different from the ones at Easter Island that are all the same. The graves vary too. Some are tombs and others are burial grounds. Usually one or more sculptures stands by each grave. And often they've learned about those cultures because of the pottery and tools and ornaments that are found in the graves. There's a so-called foot washing fountain. It's considered a very important archaeological monument in the area. There's a rocky bed of a brook, which they have dug little channels out so that the water can go through them. And you wonder, why did they do this? Some people think that it was just consecrated to water deities, or it might have been for sacrificial ceremonies, or maybe therapeutic cures. These mysterious sculptures and graves were found by a Spanish naturalist, Francis de Caldas, in an uninhabited area of southwest Colombia. That's southwest Colombia, in the late 1700s. Since then, archaeologists and scientists have tried to find answers to the questions. What was the purpose of the statues and other carvings? What was the civilization that produced these carvers? The Colombians became interested in finding out the mysteries, and they designated the whole area a national park, reconstructing it to make it look somewhat like it did 2,000 years ago. Scientists have looked for clues in the graves and by digging and radiocarbon dating. Along with the archaeologists, they've determined some facts and developed some theories. Here are some of their theories. It's believed that the area was a sacred place, site of frequent pilgrimages from neighboring tribes who gathered here for religious rites and to honor their dead who were buried there. The statues themselves symbolize life and death, forces of nature and protective gods. Some designs have been found that indicate a knowledge of astronomy, just as the earlier Stonehenge builders. Very little is known about the people who lived there and did all this remarkable art, because they disappeared. They probably were agricultural, raising maize, yucca, and peanuts, and they lived in bamboo and straw houses, which is kind of interesting because they were able to do so much with stone, and for their graves and all the statues, they made them out of stone, but their homes were very perishable. They were skilled as potters and in making gold and copper jewelry. The evidence from the quantity of stone sculpture and burial sites leads to the conclusion that their religion and rituals were important to them. It is still a mystery where this civilization came from and why it disappeared sometime before 500 AD. Now the last set of monuments look at are the Easter Island ones. Now you can get a chance to see those books, can't you? All right. Next this morning are the colossal figures called moai. Those figures here are called moai, which stand majestically on Easter Island in the South Pacific. There are nearly 1,000 of these statues, some almost 30 feet tall, imagine 30 feet tall, and weighing 80 tons. All have similar features, not the variety of those at San Augustin. They were made between 700 AD and 1600 AD, relatively recent on the Stonehenge timescale, and also after the San Augustin statues. Now they're scattered all over the island, many fallen down. The most famous moai are those I have on my poster. These 7 statues of Ahu Akibi were restored by an archaeologist, William Malloy, in 1960. Speaking of these particular statues, a native historian, Benedicto Tuki, said, when the first king, Hotu Matua, came to the island, he brought with him 7 different races from 7 different Polynesian islands, as these 7 figures. They became the ancestors of the 7 tribes of Rapa Nui. These 7 moai are not watching over the land like those with their backs to the sea. These stare out beyond the island across the ocean, remembering where they came from. This historian, who was a 68th generation descendant of the first king, noted that this information came from the oral history he learned from his grandmother. 68 generations of oral history. Mysteries surround the Easter Island statues as San Augustin and Stonehenge. But first I must tell you the real name of Easter Island. It's Rapa Nui, and the natives are the Rapa Nui. It was named Easter Island by Dutch explorers, you may have heard this story, who saw it first on Easter Day, 1722. It's really a tiny island, a volcanic island 14 miles long and 7 miles wide. It's 2,000 miles off the coast of South America and 1,000 miles from the nearest Polynesian neighbor, Pitcairn Island. Besides the Dutch, who named it Easter Island, other European and American explorers and sailors have visited the island of Rapa Nui. Here's a French explorer, and you can see how dwarfed he is by standing by that statue. Also, Thor Heyerdahl arrived in his famous raft in 1947. Some came to stay: missionaries, Scottish sheep ranchers, Peruvian slave traders, and archaeologists. Here are some archaeologists here, or other scientists measuring. The Chilean government claimed it as a possession in 1888 and currently maintains it as a park. All have questions similar to the ones that sailors on the Yankee had, as noted in this current article in November 1937. Would you believe the week I was looking up information about Easter Island, Robbins had to get something at the state library, and he wanted to look in 1937. And here he found this. And the Yankee boat that sailed around the world went to this island. And they, of course, had questions about how did this all happen? When did the stones originate? Who made them? Why was all the work on such a gigantic project apparently stopped in a day? Probably the complete answers may never be found, but most of the conclusions seem to combine oral history with research by scientists. There is agreement that before 600 AD, people from a Polynesian island came by canoes, amazingly, hundreds of miles without modern instruments to this tiny, uninhabited island. No one knows why they came. They seem to have flourished, and the population grew to about 10,000 at one time. They developed a culture which included other creativity in addition to the sculpture. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had a recent exhibit, I don't know if you saw it, showing that there were other arts besides the sculpture made by the Rapa Nui people. Some from wood and bark cloth, strings and feathers, as well as songs and dances and pictorial writing. As I said earlier, between 700 and 1600 AD, hundreds of colossal moai statues were made, obviously involving great effort by hundreds of workers. They were carved in a quarry from volcanic stone and then transported sometimes as much as 10 miles to special sites that they called alu. This is an alu, it's kind of a stone platform that the moai stand on. that holes were left where the eyes should be, and when the sculpture reached the ahu, white coral and obsidian eyes were placed in the eye sockets. They believed this awakened the moai's power. Often they added something that looked like a hat. See this on top here? These don't seem to have them, but many of them have something that looks like a hat on top, and they added that at that point. Because of all the work involved, it seems evident that the moai held a very important place in the culture and religion of the Rapa Nui, just as with the other stone monuments. However, sometime before 1600 AD, there was an outbreak of war between the tribes. Probably that was because such a small island couldn't support so many people, and there was mass hunger. Scientists and native historians agree that at the time of tribal wars, before 1600, they abruptly stopped making the moai and even toppled many over. Perhaps because of the wars and starvation, the Rapa Nui no longer believed in the power of the moai to protect them. It must have been a disillusion. By 1877, the population of 10,000 had dropped to only 110 natives, and the island had been taken over by outsiders. Currently a possession of Chile and maintained as a park, this has risen to 2,000 natives and about equal number of Chileans. This article in the Smithsonian magazine, it was my fortune to have, and that's where I got most of the information for the Easter Island report. And the Smithsonian magazine indicates that there's a revival of much of these arts in Easter Island and Rapa Nui. Well, thanks to Myra alerting me, Robbins and I watched a Nova TV program last summer that was all about the Rapa Nui Island and the moai sculptures, and that was great fortune. We taped it, and Robbins has kindly edited it together with a few movies of our trip to Stonehenge and to San Augustin. Unfortunately, something happened this morning to part of the tape. So the Stonehenge part you won't see, unless maybe just the end of it. But we hope the rest of it will work. It was a problem with the tape. Then he's edited in a little bit of that video, that Nova video. So we'll have some.
Stonehenge is located out in the British countryside. Standing beside one of its giant monoliths, one feels overwhelmingly dwarfed by these colossal ancient monuments. At the time that Robbins and Meg Barstow visited this site in 1976, people were permitted to walk around and actually touch the towering rocks. Since then, to protect the stones from desecration, they have been fenced off, but even viewed from some distance, they remain absolutely awesome, and the question of how and by whom they were quarried and put into place on this open plain is still one of history's most compelling mysteries. In June of 1974, in the Andes Mountains of Colombia, South America, 5 members of the Barstow family from Connecticut, USA, visited the archaeological park at San Augustin. Wearing colorful ruanas purchased in Bogota, David, Linda, Robbins, and Meg walked up the mountain road to the hilltop location of the strange monuments preserved here. They were amazed at the variety of stone statues, including this rectangular helmeted human figure. Animals like this curly-tailed monkey, observed by Cedar Barstow, a giant triangular head, and a symbolic eagle. Note in the background the stone pillars like at Stonehenge. David and Linda wondered about the significance of this figure, apparently holding a baby upside down. In another nearby area of the park were the fascinating remains of a pre-Hispanic Fuente Alto Lavapatos, or foot-washing fountain. In the midst of a grove of bamboo trees, the surface of a great rock in the bed of a stream had been carved into stone-sided pools and little holes and flowing channels. These chiseled openings and curving waterways may have been used not just for foot bathing, but for sacrificial ceremonies, or possibly for water cures. The shapes of many of the carved rocks are believed to have had symbolic significance. Heading back up the hilltop with its striking distant view, Meg and Cedar took a particular interest in a central group of figures with a huge stone slab for a roof over their heads. It is believed that these larger-than-life-size heads with dwarfed bodies may have guarded a burial tomb here for as many as 2,000 years or more.
When we went there, we were able to walk around. Now there's a fence. I'm sorry you missed the place where Rob actually was touching those.
After several hours at this amazing outdoor standing archaeological exhibit, Robbins and Meg remained in awe at the imponderable mysteries that still lie hidden at San Augustin.
Some of our family visits the archaeological park at San Augustin. Cedar took movies of Robbins and Meg on the right,
Around 400 AD, Polynesian voyagers set out across the open sea in search of new land. It is believed they sailed a large double canoe made of wood and rope lashings. Their journey took them thousands of miles across the Pacific, until, by chance, they came upon the rugged coastline of a solitary, uninhabited island. Easter Island, now known as Rapa Nui. Today, treeless, windswept land rises from an infinite sea. Just 7 miles across, Easter Island is studded with volcanic craters which provide the raw material for the stone sculptures of the past. For 1,200 years, the island culture thrived in isolation. The population may have reached as much as 10,000. It was a closed society. As far as is known, nobody came to the island, and nobody ever left. There was no recorded history. And all that remains is a thin thread of oral tradition that is passed down through generations. We do know the ancient islanders feverishly expressed themselves in stone. According to island folklore, the moai are the spirits of powerful ancestors. They were raised on platforms called ahu, which were the centers for ancestral worship among the island's clans. But as population grew on the tiny island, conflict erupted between the clans. Food and timber were scarce. The people stripped the landscape of its once abundant trees. Today, only thin soils and exposed pastures survive. Could it be that this remote civilization ultimately destroyed itself over the moving and raising of their sacred moai? No one knows how the many-ton statues came to stand at their sacred sites. How could an isolated culture with only the simplest tools move monoliths from the quarry to sacred platform sites scattered all over the island, some of them 5 miles away? Legend says the statues magically walked to their venerated platforms. To penetrate beyond the myths, Nova assembles a team of archaeologists, engineers, and the Easter Islanders themselves. Together, they launch a series of hands-on experiments to explore the methods used by the ancients. But no one anticipates the events that unfold.
We want to go little by little.
Ideas clash.
No, and I go by the study because the angle is different.
Tensions escalate as new methods are presented.
I got 12 people moving 6 tons. You didn't do that.
That's 65? Yeah. No way.
Resources run out, just as they did in ancient times.
What are we going to do, fight over it?
This is the legacy of Easter Island, a culture that exhausted itself in moving giant stone. How did this ancient society achieve such monolithic greatness? And why did it fall?